Hi, it's Andrew Malcolm here again. It's Good Friday, Easter weekend, April 2020. And I want to give you my 5 cents worth or 5 minutes worth today about how to act in times of trial. These trying times, we're still in COVID-19 lockdown, but things are starting to look better. And it's very interesting that this is happening at Passover, or having just had Passover tradition. And the Passover tradition is really a good example of how to act in times of trouble. The Israelites had prayed for a way out, and long story short, of course, we have Moses on the scene, and he says the final disaster is all the children are going to be killed unless the spirit of death passes over us. It avoids us. And how do we do that? Well, they asked the Lord to show them, and he gave them an action. So they asked, they listened for the answer, and then they had to actually do something. It wasn't just take this away from us, Lord, but there was an action they had to actually endure, and that was to put the Passover lamb's blood over each doorway, and then the illness, the death, would pass over them. See, evil prevails when good men do nothing. This is a bit of a paraphrase of the old Proverbs 24 that talks about how we should be helping others in times of trial, in fact, saving them from death. And I think it's also, for me, it's a bit of a parallel to Jesus talking in Mark 10:21, when he actually talks about the rich man being a good man. He goes through all the things the man should be doing, and this man says, yes, but I've done all those, Lord. How do I follow you more? He says, you have to act. There's one more act you need to do, and that's to give away everything you have. So the evil will continue to prevail when good men do nothing. So good men, by that I mean men of God, women of God, people of God, when people do nothing. The biggest problem that in our Christian faith is that sense of the wrong attitude that we have, that how would God allow this to happen? Why would God allow this to happen? Isn't God a good God? He is a good God. But I think people keep forgetting there's a flip side. There is a devil. This is his world. He is controlling it. He doesn't control us if we're under God, but he still controls the situation around us. And in fact, the second false teaching, if you like, is that many have had in the church even, and that's about how God is just good, and there is no evil. That this almost prosperity gospel where we can be in the good space all the time. And that is sort of true, but it leads people onto thinking that bad things can't happen. And then when they do happen, they fall away from God because they haven't got the stability. In fact, when you look at Scripture, you'll see over and over and over again, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scriptures telling us there will be trials, there will be issues, but there is a way through. Just very quickly, having read so many of them, I want to share an Old Testament scripture, a New Testament scripture, and of course a gospel. So the one from the Old Testament, Isaiah 41:13, for I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. Now this is quite significant. It is I who say, fear not, for I am the one that helps you. So in that trial and adversity, he holds your right hand. Now the interesting thing about that is that he has his right hand free because he's holding your right hand with his left hand. Now your right hand is always the hand you fight with in the Old Testament. That's your fighting hand. So you have to give up your fight and hold the Lord's hand so he will fight for you. In Romans 12:12, and Paul writes a lot about trials and tribulations, but this one I like, very short. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing in prayer. So there's the seeking the Lord and rejoicing and praising and worship, as I talked about in my other sessions, but then being patient in that tribulation, listening out for what the Lord wants to do, and praying, continually praying. Jesus' words in John 16:33, I have said these things to you, that in me you shall have peace. In the world, however, you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. I have a story about trials and tribulations and overcoming, and I'll just share it briefly with you. Many know that I'm a funeral director, and I got quite sick 10 years ago, and I'd had 2 procedures that weren't successful, and I had one more lined up, and they said, if this doesn't work, that's it, lights out. I was in the back of a church at a funeral by the sound system, listening to what the priest was saying, and he spoke about the 23rd Psalm, which is a very common scripture to use at funerals. But when he got to the point talking about nice valleys and all the rest of it, then he got to the point where he said, even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death and evil, I will be with you. My rod and my staff will comfort you. I'd heard that so many times, but then suddenly something twigged in my mind. It doesn't say, even though you walk with me, I will always put you on mountaintops and high ranges, and everything will be sweetness and light. No, it says, even though you will have trials and troubles, it will be dark. It will be a lonely, deep, dark, dangerous place. But I will be with you. A bit like that Isaiah verse. I'll be holding your right hand so that I can fight with my rod and my staff and comfort you. And the thing that really struck me was that the root word of comfort is not what we perhaps perceive more these days with nice and tap you on the shoulder and give you a hug. But the root word of comfort is to come forte, to come fight with you, to come fight on your behalf. You actually have to go and fight, but he will fight with you on your behalf. You have to actually be in that dark place. Yes, you have to relinquish your sword and let him do the fighting, but you don't do that from the mountaintop. You still have to walk through that dark valley. And it was then that I realized in my story that there was darkness ahead, but I could trust in the Lord if I gave my right hand into his left hand and didn't just blindly walk with him, but kept seeking his face and saying, Lord, what do I do now? What should I do? How should I walk through this? So don't try and avoid the pain is what we're saying. Walk through those valleys. And if you trust in the Lord, he'll be with you. In fact, Mark 4:17 warns us that we shouldn't try to avoid them. In fact, that's where trouble will come. He goes on to say that they have no root in themselves, will endure for a while. Then when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the world, not account of God, but on account of the world, then they will fall away. So don't be one of them. Instead, if you love him, you have a choice. Final scripture in Romans 8:28. In all situation, God works things, whatever the issues are, into something good for those that love him. So if you do love him, you have a choice. Suffer bitterly because of the world, or look to him in spite of the world. So my final words. When you're facing something that you can't handle, when things seem to be out of control, ask God to not just be with you, as he always is, but to come and fight with you, leading you through, leading your thoughts, decisions, actions through the dark and into the light, where that cup for you overflows. Ask, listen, and act in times of trial.